I look forward to seeing you on what promises to be a very thought-provoking and an insightful discussion on the current and emerging set of risks.
Good
I'm
evening.
Ruchi Radwal, and I head the markets function for MGC Global Risk Advisory. We are currently seeing several key risks in your industry. The first being supply chain interruptions, which can affect the availability of parts and equipment and eventually impact projected timelines. The second would be that the infrastructure sector is people and equipment intensive. These are largely your fixed costs and they need monitoring while optimizing productivity. Natural disasters and pandemics and other events that stall projects will have an adverse impact on the initial set of assumptions for project completion and monetization. Also, we have seen that the sector has a multiplicity of stakeholders, right from the government to local communities to the eventual user. So you run the risk of the possibility of lawsuits and brand damage in the event of any one of the wide set of stakeholders not being aligned through the journey of the project.
So let me begin by talking about the pre-bid projects. What type of projects that we need to take? Will we build airports? Will we build metro? Will we build underground metro? Will we build stadium? And that needs to be taken very important. We need to take a call on pricing because most of the contracts are fixed cost contracts. How about maintaining secrecy? Because what happens is there are multiple people who are there's competition. Like bids have been lost by, it will be a 2,000 crore job, but it will be lost by a margin of 1 crore or 2 crores. As Ruchi rightly called out, that there is a huge emphasis by the government for infrastructure under various models. So we need to understand under which model are we going to operate, how is our returns going to come, availability of skilled labor. We have to understand ownership issues because various countries have their own ways of operating and own ownership requirements, whether we are going to be a JV, whether we are going to be a consortium. Understand currency risks as well. How are we going to mitigate it? How do we monitor the project progress? Are we doing well on time and cost? Is there any additional work that the client is asking us to do? Is there a proper methodology to document this process? Because if there is any excess work which has come about, it must be documented in a proper way because it will help us in our claims management. How decentralized our decisions are. How are we complying with the laws and the local conditions? We all know that how difficult it is to handle local conditions. When we come to the closure of the projects, I think the claim management process is the single most important thing that will make or break a construction company.
We see supply side risks, increase in cost due to dependence on imported goods. Cement companies use crude derived petroleum coke, called pet coke, and imported coal as key inputs. Now, prices of these commodities have already elevated, but the ongoing conflict around the world, this could add to further upward pressure on supply constraints. Come to demand side risks. Upstick in demand has not been as strong as previously anticipated. Demand for cement, particularly in the residential and non-residential construction markets, could decline if companies and consumers cannot obtain credit for construction projects, or if the slow pace of economic activity results in delays or cancellations of capital projects. Our experts believe that digital tools for supply chain can generate efficiency gains while emphasizing why cement companies need to build a digital first integrated ecosystem that offers superior transparency across the supply chain and RFID to manage the flow of raw materials through the supply chain and ultimately prevent stockouts or overstocking.
So I think, Ruchi, you have hit the nail on the head. On one side, we had the economy, really looking up just before COVID, when COVID happened, because we are so much a part of the overall supply chain ecosystem that we provide on a continuous basis, because we are a continuous process industry. We really keep very little inventory. We are more of a just-in-time industry. So our entire supply chain from the beginning to the end, whether it is our mining resources, like what you mentioned, pet coke and pet fine and imported coal, and the alternate fuel requirements of various shapes and size, which is flowing in from different geographies depending upon their availability. All of these needs to be on time, and then once we produce, we need to have a seamless supply chain which will take my produce to the market. If you are storing clinker, or if you are storing coal, if you are storing fly ash, all of these you need to be storing in a very environmental conscious manner. Recently, government has increased prices of diesel for bulk consumers by 25 rupees straight away, right? So that has got a huge impact. So these are kind of impacts which you take on the chin, and what it does is we have suddenly have a shortage of vehicles. So a lot of transporters have said, we are going to go off-road if you don't allow me to fill from the petrol pumps. Digitization is another aspect which we are working on big time.
As digital startups need to quickly progress and scale up in the backdrop of intensifying competition. Risks of technology obsolescence, disruptions due to cyber attacks, and a maze of governance issues dominate the risk pile for digital companies.
Startups, as we all know, and as you also mentioned, Ruchi, are very agile. I would say that the startups or the management in startups are not aware of risk. They are aware of risk, but more often the formal frameworks to suit to the business needs, size and scale are missing. More often we've seen the approach to handle risk is reactive and not proactive, and that's where if we act proactively, I think that is what is needed. Customize the risk framework to suit to the business needs. Startups are agile and fast in their decision making, so it's important to have risk framework which allows that faster decision making. The second is on the governance risk, Ruchi, as you mentioned. Of late, we've been hearing a lot of cases of weak governance in digital startup ecosystem. The businesses who have grown rapidly and have been doing fairly well and have created disrupted business models, but unfortunately got caught on the wrong footing as far as the governance in the business is concerned. Therefore, it is super critical for the founders, management, as well as for the investors to keep governance right at the center and not focus on growth at the cost of governance. Create an audit plan to cover the critical and important areas of your business, to identify the loopholes so that you can fix it on the fly and plug those gaps as you're growing the business. Since the onset of pandemic, I think if we all look back, all the businesses have dealt with this cyber risk in some form and fashion. The risks have increased manyfold because of the remote operations and the evolution of a different type of how we operate in the business. Of late, we've also seen that the data oversight or the regulatory framework on the data side is growing very fast. And this is one of the biggest asset for most of the digital businesses. Therefore, it is very important for the businesses to not only protect the data of the customers, but also protect the data of the business as well. If you can afford, it is better to have a separate function who can provide a strong oversight, implement policies or processes for better controls, perform regular independent vulnerability assessments for the business so that you can identify the gaps and fix it.
The list of fraud risks is endless, starting from asset misappropriation, inventory frauds, fraudulent disbursements, falsification of expense claims, kickbacks for vendors and employee onboarding considerations, going on to cyber theft, financial statement misreporting, concealment of liabilities, etc., analysis of liquidity and gearing. Harish, what would be your take on the current and emerging fraud risks?
You touched upon all the various areas that we can get impacted. I particularly liked Vikas's approach here, where he talked about how governance, especially in the startup community, has created a lot more sensitivity because recently a lot of these startups, especially in the fintech area, especially in the IT apps area, are starting to dominate the front page media. And so, there is no industry, I would say, that is immune to this. And especially this particular area of fraud risk is very sensitive because you see, frauds are always conducted by individuals. So we would always have, a list of low integrity individuals that we would have on our radar, and we would always have a list of vulnerable areas that we would want to pay special attention to. Now, operational risks are coming into play. What kind of mitigations can we, as risk managers, take? So, I have something like 4 prescriptions which I would like to, lay on the table. And one of the most important things we should look at, and this is coming from a prevention point of view, is the integrity of the people involved. I would want to perhaps monitor them closely, especially if they don't fit all your integrity, ratings. Building, again, on the prevention side, building a culture of compliance is very important. And here, the conduct of promoters have really also come into play, and the top management and how they behave has become very sensitive now, especially in the startup arena that Vikas was talking about. And then two mitigations I would suggest from the detection side. We need to make sure that the red flag reviews are happening. Many times red flags are there, especially put out by the audit community, but not very many people pay attention to it. There ought to be some very robust follow-up mechanisms by some special teams like a forensic team within the organization or external to the organization. And finally, all companies need to have on call some forensic experts, either in.
Manish, how can organizations enhance their risk management frameworks to optimize value creation in the current times? Second question is, where have organizations been falling short? And the third question is, what are some of the trends for effective risk management in the current and the times ahead?
Each of the panelists is so well aware of the risks in his industry. They pointed out risks which, are extremely important for everybody to make a note of. But they cannot manage, they cannot mitigate the risk by themselves. It has to be an enterprise-wide effort. And therefore, whenever I hear the term risk management, I always say it is not risk management today. It was in 1970s. But come 2000, it's no longer just confined to financial risk management or credit risk management. It is enterprise-wide risk management. The first thing that organizations today are failing to do, they're not making a clear distinction between a threat, a vulnerability, and a risk. You cannot manage a threat. You can't. Vulnerability is something you must cite, something which is intrinsic in your organization, your environment, your way of working, that's attracting that threat. That translates into a risk. The reason for the distinction between these three terms is extremely important because risk you can manage, but threat you cannot manage. So if you start off by not clearly articulating what is the risk, no matter what Surat may want, no matter the brilliance of Satish, Vikas, Harish, everyone, you will not be able to get there. The second aspect, which we feel that companies must do is how do they. So the concept of risk appetite was introduced in 2017 by a revision in the COSO framework. Risk appetite, risk tolerance. These are such fancy terms, but not very clearly understood. Defining the risk appetite, how do you do that? The traditional way is you look at the likelihood, you look at the impact, you multiply the likelihood into impact, and you get your polarization, you get your risk score. What is impact? Is it financial impact only? What about reputational impact? What about your impact on your operations, your people, your morale, your productivity? It's important for you to very clearly identify attributes of impact. Those organizations that get to the identification of attributes of impact should not stop here. They should take it one step forward because different attributes of impact mean different things to the same organization or to different organizations at a given point of time. So finance can get a different weightage, reputation can get a different. For us, reputation is most important, profits come later. The third element is in terms of polarization of risks. When do you polarize the risks? Do you do it at a gross level or do you do it at a residual level? And this is where a lot of confusion comes in. To be able to ascertain the prioritization you need to attach for a CBA in terms of the mitigating measure. The mitigating measure where companies fall short is that they look at the mitigating measure for now. You don't have to simply look at the mitigating measure for now. You don't have to, let me take a step back, only look at whether the mitigating measure is resulting in the risk being in control. You have to take it beyond. So you need to be able to very clearly see as to whether that risk is resulting in, whether the mitigating measure is resulting in the risk being in control, under control, or now, or over control, and not just for now, but for the foreseeable future, 2 to 3 years, think ahead, given the nature, size, and complexity of your business and your planned growth. Value creation, uh, I hinted on it. Value creation is not the responsibility of one person. Organizations, it's a collaborative, cohesive effort. Everybody must understand that the risk assessment.
I think we fail more by being timid rather than taking risks. Until you are prepared to take risk, you will do nothing, have nothing, and be nothing. If you are not willing to take to risk the unusual, you will have to settle for the ordinary. If you don't risk anything, then you risk even more. There is a risk you cannot afford to take, and there is a risk you cannot afford not to take. Take risk, but preempt the consequences. The pessimist sees risk in every opportunity. The optimist sees opportunity in every risk.
Wow.